In most missing persons cases, the first question is where. But in the disappearance of Jay Slater, the most haunting question may be why. Why did Jay end up nearly 20 miles away from his accommodation in one of the most remote and unforgiving parts of Tenerife? Why did he go with two older men he barely knew? And why did he leave that Airbnb in such distress? The theory that Jay Slater was lured to the Airbnb didn't come from wild speculation. It came from a growing sense that his journey made no logical sense, that something about it felt off. According to the initial account, Jay had become separated from his friends and accepted an invitation to go to an Airbnb with two men he'd only just met. But many people, including former detective Mark Williams Thomas, have questioned that narrative. Jay had friends nearby. He had options. He was young, but not naive. So why would he follow two strangers, 10 to 12 years his senior, to a secluded location he had never been to before? From the very beginning, the timeline and decision-making didn't track. The distance, the location, the company, the conditions, it didn't add up. What makes this theory so powerful and so disturbing is its plausibility. Not because of a single detail, but because of the pattern it suggests. Party destinations like Tenerife are known for nightlife, risk, and sometimes exploitation. It's not uncommon for tourists to be offered drugs, parties, or lifts by people they've just met. Some walk away unharmed, others don't. Jay's story fits a profile that many recognize. A young man, possibly under the influence, isolated from his group, drawn into something he didn't fully understand, until it was too late. That's why this theory exists, because the idea that Jay simply went on a spontaneous trip to the mountains doesn't sit right with the facts. And the further you dig, the more deliberate it all starts to feel. In the next chapter, we'll explore the setting itself and ask, why would anyone stay in an Airbnb in the middle of Masca? Masca isn't a place you stumble upon. It's not on the main strip, it's not near the clubs, it's not within walking distance of the hotels or the bus routes that carry partygoers to and from the festival. Masca is remote, high in the mountains of northwest Tenerife, surrounded by steep ravines, narrow roads, and treacherous drops. Getting there requires planning, and getting out isn't something you do casually, especially on foot. So we have to ask, why was the Airbnb located there? More importantly, why was Jay Slater taken there? If this was simply a case of becoming separated from friends, why go that far? Why not stay more locally, or at least attempt to contact the friends he had travelled to Tenerife with? The drive from Los Cristianos to Masca isn't short. It takes nearly an hour, along winding cliffside roads that are difficult even in the daylight. In contrast, Jay's accommodation was supposedly less than a 10-minute drive from the festival location. This wasn't a convenient choice. This was deliberate. The Airbnb was in one of the most secluded parts of the island, an area with poor phone signal, no easy transport options, and no nearby public safety infrastructure. For someone unfamiliar with the terrain, it would feel disorienting, even dangerous. To reach help, you'd need to walk for miles. To call for help, you'd need enough battery and signal, which Jay didn't have despite Ayub himself admitting to telling Jay where to find a charger. And to leave on your own, you'd need to be calm and in control. Jay, by every account, was none of these things. And this leads to a chilling realization. If someone wanted to isolate him, to get him out of public view, to control the situation, to ensure he had no escape, Masca was the perfect place to do it. It wasn't just remote, it was strategic. Some believe the Airbnb was chosen exactly for that reason, not to help Jay, but to contain him, to distance him from friends, phones, cameras, and options. Whether it was a trap, a plan gone wrong, or simply a reckless decision, the setting was a factor, and it may hold more answers than anyone has admitted. So let's look at the two men who brought him there. Who were Ayub Kasim and Stephen Rokas, and why did they want Jay in that house? If we want to understand what happened to Jay Slater, we have to start with the people he was last seen with. Two men older than Jay, both from the UK, and both strangely absent in the aftermath of his disappearance. Their names are Ayub Kasim and Stephen Rokas. Let's start with Ayub Kasim, the man who has drawn the most attention. Kasim was 31 years old at the time of Jay's disappearance. He was not just a stranger off the street, he had a history. As we've mentioned previously, in 2015, Kasim was convicted for operating a county lines drug trafficking network in the UK. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison after being caught running Class A drugs from London to Wales. He reportedly used fake names to cover his tracks. According to reports, he served a significant portion of that sentence before re-entering society. And yet, there he was in Tenerife, staying in a remote Airbnb in Masca during the same week as the NRG festival. He wasn't a teenager, he wasn't there to party. So what was he doing there? We know Kasim was questioned by Spanish police after Jay disappeared. In his version of events, Jay simply left the property on his own that morning. Kasim denied any wrongdoing and, according to sources, cooperated with the early investigation. But in the aftermath, he has refused to speak further and vanished from public view. Ayub went on to do some live videos on social media in an attempt to explain his version of events, but this made the story even more questionable. Now to Stephen Rokas, the second man. Far less is known about him. His online presence is minimal. No criminal history has been publicly confirmed. He hasn't issued any statements. In fact, his name was barely mentioned at all in the early coverage, which is strange considering he was also present at the Airbnb. Together, Kasim and Rokas represent a troubling blind spot in this investigation. Why were they in Masca? How did they meet Jay? What were their interactions like before, during, and after his visit? And perhaps most importantly, why haven't they spoken publicly to defend themselves, clarify what happened, or express sympathy except for some bizarre social media live videos? Their silence has only deepened suspicion. Because when two older men are the last known people to see a 19-year-old alive, and they vanish from public view, people start to ask the questions that police won't. In order to understand this, we must explore a crucial dynamic often overlooked in this case: the power imbalance between Jay and the men who took him to that house. Jay Slater was 19 years old, still a teenager, and still figuring things out. On holiday with friends, enjoying life, far from home. Ayub Kasim was 31. Stephen Rokas, also reportedly older, with years of life experience Jay didn't yet have. So when we ask how Jay ended up in a remote Airbnb with two men he'd only just met, part of the answer may lie in the power imbalance. Not physical power, but psychological, situational, social. Because when you're 19 and you're suddenly being shown attention by older people, offered a lift, a place to stay, maybe drinks, drugs, or status, it can feel exciting. You feel chosen, trusted, included. But that's also how manipulation works. There's a real difference between being invited somewhere and being recruited. And in party hotspots like Tenerife, that line is often blurry. Some older men use charm, money, or social capital to draw younger people into situations that feel like friendship, until they're not. If Jay was vulnerable, tired, intoxicated, or simply eager to keep the night going, he may have ignored the red flags. Or maybe he never saw them to begin with. Kasim, by contrast, was someone who had moved in criminal circles. Someone who knew how to operate under the radar. Someone who could present as friendly, while holding far more power than he let on. Even if Rokas had no criminal history, his presence added weight to the situation. Two older men, one younger guest. That's not a balanced dynamic, especially in an isolated location. And we need to consider something else too. Jay wasn't in familiar territory. He was in another country, likely without access to his usual support network. Once he got to Masca, he was cut off, geographically and socially. From that moment on, whatever happened would be on their terms, not his. It's important to ask these uncomfortable questions, not to demonize, but to understand how control and coercion can happen in subtle ways, without force, and often without immediate warning signs. Whatever happened inside that Airbnb, it caused Jay Slater to leave in a hurry. He didn't just walk away. He didn't wait for an apparent lift offered by Ayub. He didn't take water, a charger, or any help. He left alone, on foot, into the mountains. This isn't normal behavior, it isn't logical, and it certainly isn't safe, especially for a tourist unfamiliar with the terrain. So the question is simple, but terrifying. What might have spooked Jay? We know that by around 8:30 a.m., Jay spoke to Lucy Law. He said he was lost. He didn't know where he was. He needed water, and that his phone battery was at 1%. Those are not the words of someone who had a plan. Those are the words of someone in panic. Mark Williams Thomas, the former detective who looked into the case, has stated clearly, Jay left the Airbnb in a rush. He was distressed. There was fear in that decision. But what caused it? Did someone threaten him? Did an argument escalate? Did someone arrive unexpectedly? One theory is that Jay was confronted, possibly over the alleged stolen watch, or over something that had gone wrong during the night. If the many was turned on him, he may have bolted to avoid violence. Another theory suggests that Jay had witnessed something, a deal, an altercation, or an act that made him feel unsafe. In that moment, fight or flight kicked in, and Jay chose flight. There's also the possibility that someone else arrived at the Airbnb that morning. Someone not part of the original group. Someone angry or dangerous. In that case, Jay may not have just fled. He may have been told to run. And then, there's the theory that Jay was manipulated into running. That fear was created. That he was made to believe he needed to escape, while others sat back and watched him walk into isolation. What we know for certain is this. Jay left on foot, through some of the most difficult terrain in Tenerife. No path, no shade, no resources, just cliffs, ravines, and heat. You don't make that kind of move unless you believe the alternative is worse. In the next chapter, we'll examine one of the strangest parts of this entire situation. The lack of digital evidence. No messages, no additional phone calls. So we ask, why the digital silence? In an age where every move is tracked, messaged, or shared, the silence around Jay Slater's final hours is unsettling. We know Jay made a phone call to Lucy Law and spoke to Brad Hargreaves just before 9 a.m. He sounded disoriented, lost, thirsty. His phone battery was at 1%. Then, nothing. No follow-up call, no texts, no voice note, no emergency message. For someone in a life-threatening situation, in harsh, remote terrain, this absence of digital communication is hard to understand. Because people don't just disappear. Their phones usually tell a story. But Jay's phone went quiet. The calls to Lucy and Brad were the only known communication before his phone died. There are also reports that Jay also had a brief call with his friend Brad Hargreaves around the same time. But the exact timing, duration, and content of that call remain unclear. All we have is Brad's statement to the media when interviewed by a journalist. Nothing that was said during this interview can be confirmed by factual evidence. So why didn't Jay try to call the police? There are a few possible explanations. His phone may have died faster than he expected. He may have been too panicked or dehydrated to think clearly. Or, as with many young people these days, calling the police for help isn't even a consideration. This is normally the case when there is illegal activity taking place. Or, and this is more disturbing, his phone may have already been compromised before that final call was even made. Some have speculated that Jay's phone was taken or searched during the night, that messages or locations may have been manipulated, that tracking was turned off on purpose by someone else. If true, that would suggest intent, control, preparation. There's also the possibility of missing metadata, that more digital evidence exists but has not yet been released by investigators or phone providers. Authorities have been tight-lipped, and it's not yet known how extensively phone records or location data have been forensically reviewed. This digital blackout leaves us with a crucial gap. We can guess where Jay was from his location pin that was sent to a friend. We can guess how he felt, but without the data, we're left with silence. And in a case where every second counted, silence is the last thing anyone needed. Jay Slater's disappearance has unsettled many people, not only because of its mysterious details, but because it fits into a troubling pattern that is seen far too often in party destinations around the world. Tenerife, like Ibiza, Zante, and other popular hotspots, attracts tourists for its nightlife, music festivals, and the sense of freedom that comes from being far from home. But that same atmosphere can also create an environment where danger is easy to disguise. It becomes much easier for the wrong kind of people to blend in, target the vulnerable, and take advantage of those who are intoxicated, isolated, or eager to keep the party going. Across Europe, there have been numerous documented cases of young tourists who went missing after being led away by strangers. Some were lured to remote villas or apartments under the promise of a party, drugs, or a place to stay. Others were manipulated by older individuals who appeared friendly, but were operating with ulterior motives. In some cases, the victims reappeared, shaken or traumatized. In others, they were never seen alive again. These stories are not rare, and they provide chilling context to Jay's case. Let's look at the case of Natalee Holloway. In the case of Natalee Holloway, an 18-year-old from Alabama who disappeared in 2005 in Aruba, she left in a car with men she'd just met, and was never seen alive again. Sadly, she was declared legally dead in 2012. One of the men who she was seen with admitted to killing her, though he has never been charged in Aruba. There's also the 2023 case of Aydin Brown, a 14-year-old American cruise ship passenger who'd been traveling with his grandmother. Brown disappeared in Germany after reportedly disembarking and being seen on CCTV with an unknown adult. Thankfully, he was found safe and alive 3 days later, over 100 miles away. Reports suggest he had planned to meet up with a 19-year-old male. These stories share a chilling template. A young person, often intoxicated or eager to socialize in a new place. A sudden separation from peers, followed by an older stranger offering help, transport, a bed, or companionship. Then, complete disappearance. Jay's situation mirrors this pattern. He was 19, from the UK, and reportedly intoxicated. He separated from his group after a festival and ended up in a remote Airbnb with 2 older men he'd only just met, and the men have remained almost entirely silent since his disappearance. This context doesn't confirm what happened to Jay, but it does highlight a well-documented phenomenon. Vulnerable young travellers can, and do, vanish after placing their trust in strangers. Understanding that context doesn't prove guilt. It simply grounds Jay's case in a known pattern. If he was lured, his story isn't unique. But unless lessons are learned, it may not be the last time this happens. Numerous other unsolved cases or unreported cases in European hotspots also follow this pattern. Strangers appearing friendly, offering a lift or a place to stay, and then vanishing along with a young tourist they befriended. In many of these cases, the same warning signs appear. A sudden separation from friends, older strangers entering the picture, remote or hard to reach locations, and a sharp shift in communication patterns just before the individual goes missing. Jay's story echoes many of these elements. He was young, far from home, and reportedly under the influence. He was separated from his group and ended up in an isolated part of Tenerife with two men who were significantly older and largely unknown to his inner circle. The location was not convenient, and the men involved have since offered little to no public clarity about what happened. The broader context matters because it highlights how vulnerable young travelers can be in these environments, especially when trust is misplaced, or when predators take advantage of the chaos that follows large-scale events like music festivals. Understanding the patterns doesn't prove what happened to Jay, but it does make one thing clear. Situations like this are not without precedent. If Jay was lured, he would not be the first, and unless lessons are learned, he will not be the last. The Airbnb is central to this theory. The property itself was isolated, perched in the mountainous village of Masca, far removed from the urban nightlife of southern Tenerife. Its location immediately raises a critical question. Who booked it, and for what purpose? Reports confirm that the Airbnb was not booked by Jay or any of his friends. It was registered under the name of one of the two men he accompanied, Ayub Qasim. The booking was reportedly made in advance, suggesting that this was not a spontaneous decision to stay somewhere after a long night. It had been arranged ahead of time. This opens up several lines of inquiry. If the men had been planning to stay in Masca all along, what was the purpose of bringing someone like Jay there, someone they had only reportedly just met at the festival? Was the invite a last-minute gesture or part of a broader plan? There is a lot of speculation that suggests that Jay's friends knew Ayub before this, something Ayub inadvertently confirmed in one of his live social media broadcasts. It is also worth considering why the men chose Masca in the first place. As explored earlier, this is not a convenient or central location. It is difficult to access, lacks mobile signal, and is not near any of the major nightlife hubs. If the men were simply visiting Tenerife to enjoy the festival, their decision to stay in Masca appears unusual. This suggests two possibilities. Either the location was chosen because it was affordable or available, and the invitation to Jay was genuine but naive. Or more disturbingly, the property was selected precisely because of its isolation. In that case, bringing Jay there may not have been an act of hospitality, but a calculated move to control the setting and remove him from public view. The financial details of the booking have never been publicly disclosed, but what is clear is this. Jay Slater did not end up in Masca by accident. He was taken there by two older men who had access, transport, and control over the accommodation. That makes the Airbnb far more than just a backdrop. It becomes part of the theory itself, a setting that may have been chosen not for convenience, but for concealment. When we look at the events surrounding Jay Slater's final hours, one thing becomes increasingly difficult to believe: that this was all just a coincidence. The location was remote, the men were older, the decisions were uncharacteristic, and the outcome was fatal. Jay didn't just miss a bus. He was led into the mountains by two men he had only just met, to a location that was far from any safety net. That fact alone changes the idea that what happened next was simply the result of poor judgment or bad luck. Everything about the setup, from the Airbnb's isolated position in Masca to the silence that followed from the men involved, suggests a situation that deserves closer scrutiny. Was Jay lured there? The evidence is circumstantial, but the pattern is disturbingly familiar. A young person, far from home, drawn into an environment they don't fully understand, by people who hold more power than they realize. It's possible that Jay was promised a place to rest, a chance to keep the party going, or an opportunity that seemed harmless at the time. It's equally possible that he was manipulated, selected because of his age, energy, or his vulnerability, and once he realized something wasn't right, it might have already been too late. There remains a slim chance that all of this was simply a series of poor decisions made under the influence of fatigue, alcohol, and drugs. That Jay wasn't targeted, just tragically unlucky. But that explanation feels increasingly hollow when weighed against the facts. The truth is, Jay Slater ended up in a place he never should have been, with people who have yet to offer a clear or consistent account of what happened. Whether he was lured with intent, or simply taken advantage of in a moment of weakness, the result was the same. A young life lost under circumstances that remain unresolved. The theory that Jay was trapped, manipulated, or sacrificed may never be confirmed, but it cannot be ignored. Because if there was a trap, then there was a plan. And if there was a plan, someone out there still knows exactly what happened and why Jay never came back. With that, we conclude this episode on Jay Slater. Thank you for watching this episode on the Silent Casebook. This investigation is far from over. We're releasing new episodes in this 10-part series every 2 days, each one exploring a different theory behind the disappearance and the death of Jay Slater, carefully, factually, and without sensationalism. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you're alerted as soon as the next episode goes live. If you have thoughts, questions, or perspectives of your own, leave a comment below. We read everything, and we welcome respectful discussion. This isn't about entertainment, it's about answers, and if the official story still doesn't make sense, then it's up to all of us to keep asking the right questions.